Okay, 4.1 writing equations from graphs. Up here at the top, I've written the equation that we use to actually write the graph. We're going to use the same equations to take a graph and then write the equation. And it does say in the directions here we're going to do both a sine and a cosine. I'm going to do that on number 1, and then from there on we're just going to do whichever one is easiest, whichever one is more obvious. Okay, so looking at number 1, we're going to go through, I'm going to remind you what each of these means. C is the vertical shift. That is the sinusoidal axis, which in this case is -5. Right? A is the amplitude. That's how far up and how far down we have to go to get to the top and the bottom. Okay, so that's 7. Right? And if I'm writing a sine graph, okay, the next thing I need to know is B, which is the frequency. Now remember, we used to do the period equals 360 divided by B. Well, it just so happens, because this is an inverse relationship, it also works to that B is equal to 360 over the period. Okay, so let's figure out what the period is here. It looks like it is 12. So if I'm going to do 360 over 12, I get 30 degrees, and that is the B. That's the frequency there. All right, and then I'm going to use theta because they have a theta there. That's another way I know that I'm in degrees besides just the degree symbol. Okay, now if I'm doing sine, I need to know this point, and I could have picked this point as well, or even this point, but I'm going to go ahead and use this one because it seems like it's going to be the easiest one to find. All right, one number is exactly between 2 and 8. If you're not sure, average the two numbers, you get 5. All right, so then I'm going to have -5. And if I were writing this as a cosine curve, I would have -5 plus 7 cosine of 30. And the only difference now is, I'm going to switch to a different color here. The only difference now is I'm looking for a peak. All right, and again, I could have chosen other peaks, but if I choose that peak, I'm going to have theta -8. Okay, so this is really all you're doing. You're just working backwards from what we did in Unit 2. And if you need a little bit of help, if you totally forgot what Unit 2 was about, maybe you need to go back and watch those videos. Okay. Okay, so looking at number 2, I have the equation here up at the top again, and I can see that this one, I already know it's going to be much easier if I do a cosine graph because I'm given the peaks. All right, this one's also in radians, so those are good things to keep in mind. All right, so we have y equals, we're given the sinusoidal axis, so that is our vertical shift. All right, our amplitude then is just 2 because it goes up to 7 and down to 3. I already said this is going to be easier to use cosine because I know the peak. If I don't use cosine, I've got to do a lot of extra work to find the sine equation. All right. The B value. All right, this is where you either need to go peak to peak, low point to low point. Peak to peak isn't too bad. It's in fractions, but if you think about it as 1/6 all the way over to 7/6, that is pi. All right, so when I'm trying to find my B value, and I'm in radians, I'm going to do 2 pi over pi, so it's just 2. All right, I'm going to use x because that's what was listed here, and typically you see x with radians. And just pick any peak. So I'm going to say minus pi over 6. I didn't make a big deal out of this earlier, but remember minus is a shift to the right and plus is a shift to the left. Okay, we're actually not going to do 3 in this video right here, so let's move on. Okay, looking at number 4, again we have our y equals. We have our sinusoidal axis, which is 4. That's our vertical shift. Our amplitude here, it looks like that is 9. And then what do you think is going to be easier here? Sine or cosine? Well, the only one that we're given here, right here, has to do with cosine. So I'm going to use cosine again. And typically if you get a choice, cosine's easier. All right, our B value. Okay, so what you can do is try to figure out what just one cycle is. All right, or you can think about truly what the frequency means. Remember, frequency was how many cycles are there in 2 pi. Well, it looks like if I start here, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 cycles for pi. So how many cycles would there be for 2 pi? Remember, this is what frequency means. It means how many cycles are there in where it used to just be 1. All right, so if there's 4 cycles for pi, there's going to be 8 cycles for 2 pi. And this kind of gets you out of some work. Otherwise, you can do it the other way, where you can divide this up by 4 and then do the 2 pi over b. Okay, or 2 pi over the period to get b. All right, and then I have x minus. I don't really need to do x minus pi. I could have just stopped at x, but x minus pi is perfectly all right. You have a lot of options here. You always have many options right there. Okay, now looking at number 56. Let me switch the color here. I'll switch it to green. All right, so you're not given your sinusoidal axis here. So we have y equals, and you're going to have to do just a little bit of work to find that middle number. Some people like to average the two numbers. Some people like to go ahead and figure out the distance between, because that will also help you with your amplitude. So if you add 56 to 38, you get 94. All right, so from here to here is 94. This is just some number work at this point. And then half that, okay, that's going to be 47. That's going to be your amplitude, all right? And if I subtract 47 from 56, all right, and you just do the work off to the side, okay, so that's going to be 9. That's going to be where your sinusoidal axis is. All right, and this is a really good way to check your work, especially when you have to do a lot of number crunching, even though it's easy. Because if I have 9 and I add 47, I get 56. If I subtract 47, I do get negative 38, so it works out quite nicely, and it's really easy to check. Okay, I'm going to erase this so I don't, so I have plenty of room to work. Okay, on this one, it looks like it's going to be, again, easier to use cosine. And that's because I already know what my shift to the right is going to be for 3. It looks like 1 cycle is going to be 20. Right, so to find my b value, do you think this is in degrees or radians? Obviously degrees. We see the degree symbol. So that gives me 18. And I'm just going to write a little arrow here, and I'm going to have theta minus 3. Okay? If you feel pretty confident at this point, you could try the others on your own. Otherwise, just keep listening and I will go through a couple more. Okay, just kidding. That was the last example. Sorry about that. I made this video on my iPad, so that's why it looks a little bit different than normal, and it kind of threw me off there for a second. All right, just as one last thing, you can always check your work by taking your final answer, whatever you get, and graphing it and seeing if the graph matches the equation. And you can do that by hand. That's probably the better way to do it. But if you're in a pinch and you just want to check it, you could do it in the calculator, although this would all be non-calculator stuff on a quiz or test. Okay.